People tell me all the time that acrylics dry too fast. If you mix a nice color, you can't go back and find it again, and that you end up wasting a lot of paint. Well, today I'm gonna tell you my best solution to help you solve that problem. So if you've mixed up a great color and then 10 minutes later try to go back to it and it's all dried out, that's a problem, because now you have to waste that paint, you're scraping it up, and you can't even get that color easily again. And honestly, this can be very frustrating, wasting you time and energy and money. Today I want to show you my solution, and it's really simple. The thing is that acrylics drying fast can actually be a strength if you know how to use them well and you have the right tools. The truth is, my acrylic painting journey changed forever when I discovered this, the Masterson Sta-Wet Palette. It's honestly a really simple design. It's just a plastic box with a lid, but inside there's two important things. This is a sponge. It's dried out right now, but it goes on the bottom, and then there is a special paper that goes on top. And I will show you exactly how to set this up, and it will change your acrylic painting forever, just like it changed mine. Essentially, once you set it up, you mix your paints right on top of here, and it keeps them wet and usable for hours and even days and weeks. So after a painting session, all I do is put the lid on, and I can come back tomorrow and use the exact same paints, the exact same mixes. Okay, I'm gonna show you exactly how to set it up the right way so that you can avoid some common problems that happen. I'll talk about those in a little bit. First of all, you need to get this saturated with water. So you put water so that the sponge gets fully saturated. It can overflow. You don't have to worry about this at this point. You're just trying to get this completely wet, and then you put the paper on top of it. You do the same thing so that the paper itself is completely covered with water. The sponge is covered with water, it's filled up, and now the paper is completely covered with water. And you want this to sit for a few minutes so that this gets almost translucent, a little bit see-through. You want to get out all the air bubbles so that there are no gaps underneath. You don't want to have any part of this that isn't fully saturated. So once it's sitting like this, you can leave it for about 5 minutes. All right, once it's saturated and it has sat for about 5 minutes, you're going to want to empty out most of that excess water. We don't want to have this too wet, or our paint can become a little bit runny. So the easiest way that I've found to deliberately figure out how much water should be in there is I take it and I work the water out from one corner to the other, and then I will flip that. I count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you see how the water just started to come out at about 8? Well, that shows me that it has a little bit more water in there than I want. So I'm gonna get a little bit more out, and I'm gonna repeat that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and it just started dripping right there. So that's about the perfect amount that I think works for me. You might need to adjust that a little bit or figure out a way that's going to work for you, but getting the right amount of water and saturation coming through the sponge, through the paper, is a very important part of this working correctly. All right, another thing to note is that if you don't have the sponge, or it breaks down on you, or you lose it, you can always take paper towel and do a couple layers of paper towel on the bottom, and it will actually work just like the sponge does. No need to have that sponge. The most important part is the paper. After you get this out and it's the right saturation level, everything's good to go, it's soaked, of course you're just gonna put out your paints. I'm gonna use the corners. I put white there. I'll put yellow up here. I'll put red in this other corner, and I'll put blue over here. So you see that I've got a very simple primary palette, And then if I want to use black, I can put it right here. The nice thing with this, because this will keep the paints wet, the water is going to wick up through the paper from the sponge, and these piles of paint will not dry out like they would if this was just a plastic palette or a paper palette or something like that. What I can do then is I have all this opportunity to mix up amazing colors. I can keep changing these colors and adding various mixes in, and it's going to allow me to be very nuanced in my colors. If this dried really quickly, I would not be able to come back to this and grab these colors later. But because this is going to sit for hours and I don't need to worry about it at all, I can come back tomorrow. Like I said, if I put the lid on here, it's going to stay moist for a very, very, very long time. And this is really one of the main things that has helped me paint with more nuance, a little bit more subtlety. I can mix up all sorts of different colors along the way. Things that I couldn't do before because the paint would just dry. I can mix these colors together now and get a gray that's going to be really interesting. I can just add a little bit of this into that. This is impossible to do in the long term over the course of a painting unless you have a palette that is going to keep your acrylic paints moist and workable. So this is a game changer for me. I know it will be a game changer for you. Now I want to talk about a few common problems that you could run into when you're using this palette. Okay, the first thing is my paints got too runny. This can happen if you use too much water in your sponge and it soaks through and it makes all your paints turn into a liquid. You just need to figure out that right amount of saturation, the right amount of water in the sponge that's soaking through. You don't want it to be too dry that it dries out. You don't want to be too wet that it makes it all like a big puddle. That's how you solve that, but you kind of have to figure that out, trial and error, a little bit of testing and seeing over a course of a day or two what happened to my paints when I set them down and left them overnight. Were they good the next day, or had they transformed into something that I didn't like? The flip side of it being too wet, of course, is it's too dry. And sometimes what will happen is you get an air gap underneath and a little portion of this will dry out. So you need to make sure that you've pressed it down all the way around so that there's no air gaps. That air will be sneaky, it'll get in there, and sometimes if it's underneath a pile of paint, that one little area will dry out while the rest will remain saturated. So make sure you press it down with the right amount of water in there. Another common complaint with this palette is that the paints can get moldy or stinky if they're left for too long. How you can overcome this is by using copper. You can use a copper penny going back to the years that they were still copper, or you can buy some copper tape and put it down on the bottom. That's going to affect the way that the water changes over time, and it won't allow any of that to grow mold or get kind of stinky. Another thing you can do is add a little bit of hydrogen peroxide to your water as you're saturating your sponge, and that also will prohibit the growth of mold. Another common complaint that we've heard from students and people all over is that the lid doesn't close tight enough. So Masterson, if you're paying attention, hey, let's work on this. I think that there could be a better design. But what I will say is that if you start at one corner and you press it down and you work your way all the way around, you're gonna have your best chance of closing the entire container. Another thing that people will do sometimes is they will use Vaseline or some kind of extra sealant around the edges. Again, I don't do that because I use my paints regularly enough that I don't need to, but make sure that you seal it really well and your paints will stay active, mixable, and usable for weeks. You can come back to it, and if you take the safeguards against mold, they'll be just fine, and you'll be happily painting along the next time you get an opportunity. Hey guys, if this video was helpful for you, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. If you got a question for me, be sure to ask it and I'll come back and I'll try to answer it in a future video. And also, make sure you text me wherever you're stuck, whatever obstacles you got. If you've got big dreams for your art and you just want another person to look at where you're at and try to give you some help and guidance, I'm here for you. Text me at 425-400-2094. I got you for life. We'll see you next time.